One of the questions I have received a lot over the years is, well, if you believe in God, where did God come from? Or who made God?
Good questions. So what's your answer?
And of course, the secularists will say, well, is there really a God? They don't believe there's a God. So,
Secularists? You mean atheists, right? And what's up with the change of angle and switch to black and white? Evil atheists? Depressed atheists? The mind boggles. Hi, my name is Scarlett. I'm an atheist and skeptic, and I found this recent video of Ken Ham pretty much saying the same things he's always said. But I guess you gotta keep churning out content for the peeps so you stay relevant. At least these videos are kind of short. This one's under 5 minutes, and they are focused on one topic. No babbling on for 3 hours a la flat earthers. And it's really clear that Answers in Genesis has a whole media team to curate the video and audio. We're going to see meaningful changes of angle, zooming in and out, and color gradient shifts. Well, meaningful, sort of. Black and white apparently indicates the sad or sinful lives of secularists. So this video is called, Here's What Atheists Always Get Wrong About God. And the video is going to highlight major inconsistencies in the evolutionary worldview. Now, notice in the first part, Ken said secularists, a synonym in his mind for atheists. There are lots of labels Christians like Ken like to put on atheists. Humanist might be another one. Of course, they are not synonyms, I think we can agree on that, but sometimes apologists treat them as one. Who calls themselves a secularist, though? You know, I think labels can be powerful when you find a way to describe your identity, when you find a word that fits and you can define yourself, especially when you're in a minority group. But I don't know anyone who says they are a secularist. One of the things that's interesting to me is how authoritarians like to decide what label you should put on yourself, how you should define yourself. And they always seem to know better than you what's going on in your mind. Ken Ham has this calm demeanor. But don't let that fool you. Authoritarians can be calm and gentle and never get angry. Being an authoritarian, though, is about deciding who other people are or should be, what values everyone should hold, what place everyone should occupy in society, and whether or not we should listen to certain experts in fields. Now on that topic, experts in fields, look at this nod to the evolutionary worldview. Interesting, huh? And of course it's not new. Now, evolution is not a worldview, like atheism is not a worldview. Even though the discovery of evolutionary theory changed how we viewed the world, it's a scientific theory that explains the diversity of life, and there is abundant evidence for it. Both theists and atheists accept evolutionary theory, like they accept heliocentrism and the germ theory of disease. But evolution is only one theory in science, and it doesn't tell us anything about stellar formation or tectonic plates, for example. And while it does describe why we evolved as moral beings, it doesn't tell us what our values should be or what laws we should enact. Evolution is silent about a whole host of things that would be included in someone's worldview. Okay, I've started out with a bunch of blibbity-blab for what is less than 20 seconds of Ken, and a web description, of course. But let's hear Ken out. What is it we evil atheists get wrong about God?
So how would we answer that question? Is there really a God? How would we know that there's a God?
Like how you know other stuff and beings exists? You've seen, heard, felt, or something else to them. Like, I don't have to do extensive proofs to know my cats exist.
Where did God come from if there is a God?
Solid question. Where do gods come from? My answer is they are inventions of the human mind perceiving agency behind physical processes. What about you?
The Bible starts off this way. In the beginning, God created. You notice something? It doesn't set out to prove the existence of God. It just says God is. God exists. And as you
Is that your reason, Ken? The Bible says God exists? By the way, I love the editing. Why are we moving further in toward Ken to emphasize this point? Why the camera angle switch? Is it to distract us from the lack of meaningful discussion? But to his point, isn't it amazing that authors act like the characters in the books are real? I know lots of books and movies now have that disclaimer about the resemblance of characters to real people being purely coincidental, but that wasn't always there. I don't know how many stories from former centuries start out with, "This story I'm about to tell is totally real, you all," or "Someone told this story to me on a train, it's real," even though the story was totally made up. And I don't think religious texts in particular, or stories about deities in general, set out to prove God since people believed in them. The Iliad doesn't set out to prove Zeus and Athena and Apollo and all the other gods in the Greek pantheon. And by the way, we aren't even sure if the human characters in that work are real either. So far I'm totally unimpressed with Ken's tactic. But Ken has more time to fill, so let's keep going.
And as you read through Scripture, the God of the Bible is a God who lives in eternity outside of time. In fact, when it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," in the beginning God created time.
We are getting a lot of use out of Genesis 1:1, aren't we? Is it that impressive of a verse? I have to say that just saying "in the beginning" does not necessarily mean God created time. Maybe time just started. Maybe I'm being nitpicky, but it doesn't say God created time. I also want to point out that in Genesis, God walks in the Garden of Eden and he visits Abraham and Sarah, and then he has chats with Moses later. So he also seems to be capable of manifesting when he can be arsed.
So God doesn't exist in time. That's why 2 Peter 3 says that with God, a day is like 1,000 years, or 1,000 years is like a day, because God is not limited by natural processes and time. God is outside of time.
What does it even mean to be outside of time? Also, that verse alone doesn't say what Ken is saying here. That God perceives times differently, yeah, but really I think what Ken means is we shouldn't expect to be able to perceive God, even though he shows up in the Bible and talks to people. But sure, he's just too friggin' mysterious, man.
So the biblical God exists in eternity. Now, how do we understand that? Well, we're finite beings. We're created beings. We will never understand that. We never can. Because to us, everything has a beginning. Because the universe had a beginning. Time had a beginning. And we're created in time. We're created in this universe. Therefore, to us, everything has to have a beginning. So we cannot, as finite beings that had a beginning, understand an eternal God who has no beginning. But
I'm going to stop the man right here. I agree that eternity is a hard concept to wrap your head around, especially as finite beings as ourselves. But we can do some hard work to understand the concept. It's not impossible, and Ken Ham seems to be relaying it pretty well. And he's no genius. Second, if this being is so hard to understand, how can you, Ken Ham, be sure you've understood his messages? How can you know the Bible correctly records what he wants? But dear viewers, you probably know Ken Ham, and you probably know where we're going with all this, right? That we shouldn't expect any proof of God. So let's keep going.
But let's think about it this way. I had a little boy once who came up to me at a conference and he said, "Mr. Ham, who made God?" And I said, "Well, son, if somebody made God, you have to have a bigger God who made God, right?" And he said, "Well, yes, sir." I said, "Now I got a problem." "Yes, sir." "Well, who made the bigger God? You have to have a bigger God who made the bigger God who made God, right?" "Well, yes, sir." I said, "Now you have a problem." He said, "I know." "Who made the bigger God? You have to have a bigger God who made the big God who made the big God who made God, right?" "Yes, sir." I said, "Now I got a problem." I know, he said. "See," I said, "you could go back and have a bigger God and a bigger God and a bigger God and a bigger God. You keep going back till you've got to get to the biggest God of all, which means the God who exists in eternity, the God who's outside of time. That's the only thing that makes logical sense. Nothing else."
Lol, it's Shiva's all the way down. What a great and heartwarming story about a little boy who gets that God's origin story is sus as fuck. God just always exists, outside space and time, and that just makes sense to Ken, even though in the previous segment he said infinite beings don't make sense to us finite beings. But of course, Ken is the super smart one who just knows shit.
Nothing else makes sense. Think about it from a secularist perspective.
I should have made this a drinking game where you have to take a shot every time he says secularist. Missed opportunity.
Why does matter even exist? Where did matter come from? When I debated Bill Nye in 2014, one of the questions asked was, where did matter come from? And his answer was, I don't know, it's a mystery. And I said, well, Bill, we have a book that tells us where matter came from. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created matter. You see,
man, Genesis 1 is like the Sweet Home Alabama of Bible verses. Like, put something else on. And of course he references his debate with Bill Nye. You know, the debate where he said no evidence could sway him off of his position. And do we have to state the obvious? Things aren't true because they are written in books. Like, I would hope that information we read in nonfiction and in textbooks is accurate, but it is only as true and correct as is reflected in the real world. Fiction may bear a resemblance to reality, but it is all made-up story, and we need to keep this in mind when we are reading, and we need to accept things provisionally, not take on everything we read as the truth TM and stake our egos on what we think we know. And the Bible is such a flawed book. It is pretty well known that God created day and night before he created the sun, which, hello, makes no sense. The apparent movement in the sky of the sun is how we define a day, but can we just read a couple chapters into Genesis? So in Genesis 4 we have, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And that note says that Nod basically refers to wandering, so basically Cain is an exile. So my question in this great accurate book is, where did all these people come from? Who is Cain worrying about? From whom is God going to protect Cain? Like, there are all these people, and they're not referred to in the Bible at all. Further down, we have this, in addition to Cain's story. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. So where did the wife come from? And who is the city for? Last I checked, cities have a lot of fucking people in them. Now, of course, there are so many oddities in the Bible we could point out, but why would we base our understanding on where matter came from on a book that doesn't provide real explanations, just some God did it magic?
You see, what do secularists believe?
Secularist, take a drink.
That matter has eternally existed, or matter came from nowhere for no reason, or that energy has always been there, or space has always been there, or time has always been there. Where did it come from? Why does any of this exist? None of it makes sense, except you have an eternal God who's outside of time, who is infinite knowledge and wisdom, who created all things just as the Bible tells us. You know,
don't you just love that effect? The zooming in, the gradual moving toward black and white as he talks about what secularists believe. So spooky, am I right? By the way, why do secularists believe what they believe, Ken? Could it be there's evidence? And this God you keep banging on about, all we know of him is from this book that you haven't established corresponds to reality. You just assert it. Argument from Trust Me Bro, classic AIG.
You know, it's interesting. I heard Richard Dawkins once asked about, a life on Earth and so on, and he suggested the idea that there could have been life on another planet that brought life to Earth and seeded life on Earth. But then the question is, where did that life on the other planet come from? Did other aliens seed that planet with life, so then they would come to this planet and seed this with life? And then where did they come from? Then were there other aliens?
It's always Shivas all the way down. It's interesting to me how often Christians name drop Richard Dawkins. Like, I don't want to discuss freaking Richard Dawkins all the time. I haven't read any of his stuff, and I just don't care. And a reminder, this Ken Ham video is from February of this year, so they're still name-dropping Dawkins like it's the mid-2000s, and the God delusion is all anyone can talk about. So to be clear, I don't care about Dawkins, and I don't want to discuss all his opinions about everything. I don't agree with him on lots of things, but I do think it's important to contextualize the Dawkins bit. This anecdote about aliens comes from a moment in Expelled, an anti-evolutionary documentary featuring Ben Stein. In it, Stein pushes Dawkins on the origin of life on Earth and especially intelligent design, and at one point Dawkins says aliens could have seeded life on Earth. There are cuts in the video, and Dawkins later said that Stein really pushed on this point about where life started and the possibility of intelligent design, and Dawkins was humoring him for the sake of the interview, unaware of how it would be misused. So does Dawkins think the Earth was seeded by aliens? No, this was a setup. By the way, a piece from Scientific American in 2008 says that several scientists thought they were being interviewed for a different kind of movie, and you can check out interviews of them saying this too. All this to say, this anecdote about Dawkins is thoroughly debunked. But when creationists find juicy tidbits, they never let them go. They can never be debunked.
You know, it's interesting. I think fallible man would believe in eternal aliens, but not an eternal God. Why?
Who said aliens were eternal? Is that what you think Dawkins said? By the way, fallible man is everybody. It includes Ken Ham. But not me. I'm a fallible woman.
Why would they do that? Because to believe in God is to understand that he created us, he created all things, therefore he owns us, therefore he sets the rules, therefore he decides what's right and what's wrong, and we don't want that.
LOL, we just want to sin. And why does creating something mean you own that thing? And who is this we all of a sudden? We don't want God's rules. I don't think this is a slip. This is deliberate to convey to Christians that they're badass. It's hard to submit to God. It's hard to follow his rules. Christians are doing the hard thing, and atheists, secularist evolutionists are giving in to their sin.
We have a sinful nature. We're in rebellion against God. So we'll believe in eternal matter. We'll believe in eternal big bangs. We'll believe in eternal energy or eternal something, but we don't want to believe in an eternal God.
So we're just so sinful, we want to actually follow the evidence. I just want to state for the record that I don't believe in eternal matter or big bangs or energy. I accept the consensus positions for scientific phenomena and principles. Right now, there is a thought that matter and energy are eternal and just exist, always. And we have evidence for matter and energy existing, unlike for God, who is just asserted to exist. Whether matter and energy have always existed or were created somehow is for me an open question, and I look forward to more research. I don't know about this eternal Big Bang thing. I don't know if we're referring to Big Bangs that keep happening. I think that Ken's just saying eternal everything at this point. We accept everything eternal but God, to signal to his followers, again, that they are better as people for accepting an eternal God.
One other little interesting thing to point out. DNA is the most complex information language system in the entire universe.
DNA is not a language system. We have attached a code so we can see what it's doing. It's chemicals.
And life is built on DNA. And there's no way DNA could come about by chance.
Incredulity alert. Ken doesn't understand thing, so thing can't be. I'm not sure what he means by the expression by chance, but I think he means uncreated by an agent that he calls God. And he's wrong. Science is discovering how DNA came about. No God needed.
Because we've never seen matter produce one bit of information. We've never seen matter produce a language system.
I don't know what he means by we haven't seen matter produce a language system. We are made of matter and we produced a language system. I think by matter he means things like rocks or dirt haven't made a language system, and no shit, they aren't thinking agents. Thinking agents produce a language. And again, DNA, not a language system.
There are zillions of bits of information in living things in this world. It's absurd to believe that life could have arose by natural processes.
Pack it in, people. Put away your microscopes and your incubators and your test tubes. Ken Ham says there's no way life arose by chance. Probably because Genesis 1:1. So we're done here. All your evidence, not worth anything anymore. Anyway, you only have that evidence because you want to sin.
But it's interesting. You'll see an archaeologist, they'll go into a cave and they'll find an arrowhead. And they'll say, oh, there was life here. Look, you can tell. Intelligence made this into an arrowhead. It just hasn't eroded as a stone. It's actually had intelligence imposed upon it. That's why it looks like an arrowhead. And they'll say, intelligence was here. And yet...
The arrowhead had intelligence imposed upon it? What fucking shit of wording is that? There was intelligence there? I know he's telling a story and this is all informal, but this is just shit. No, Ken, it didn't have intelligence imposed upon it. And archaeologists have reasons for saying that some stones were manipulated and shaped into tool use. They can compare how rock erodes with rock that has been sculpted. You can see tool marks. You even can tell that arrowheads are from different groups of people because of different techniques. It is possible to find a rock that looks vaguely like an arrowhead and have it determined that it is not. But anyway, this is all such bad wording on the part of Ken. But let's just emphasize, experts have reasons for accepting that these are arrowheads, and not any Yahoo can just declare it so. And yeah, here, by Yahoo, I mean Ken.
And yet, they'll look at DNA, the most complex information system in the entire universe, and say, oh, no intelligence happened by chance random processes. Oh, it's...
LOL, that shift to black and white. Such evil secularists. So yeah, why do they think there is no intelligence on DNA and that it arose through natural processes? Maybe because that's where the evidence points? Because we understand some of the biochemical processes that were happening on early Earth and people have done experiments? Oh no. It's just because they want to sin.
Oh, it's so inconsistent. Totally inconsistent.
This is Ken's logic. We see intelligence when we see arrowheads, but we don't see intelligence when we see DNA, even though DNA is the most complex information system. And yeah, it has information, but it isn't a language like English is. But there is no inconsistency, and Ken is not going to lay out for us why. Again, archaeologists have reasons for distinguishing arrowheads from eroded rocks, and not just, it looks like it. And origin of life researchers have reasons for thinking that DNA arose naturally. That's where the evidence points. They're both using evidence.
Man just doesn't want to believe in God because of our sinful nature. In the beginning, God created. That makes sense of everything.
And boom, there we are. We just want to sin. This is all pretty standard AIG that keeps getting repackaged. So here's what happened in that video, which is supposed to be about what atheists get wrong about God, with a bonus about inconsistency in the evolutionist's worldview. So Ken Ham set up that God is eternal outside of time and he was not created, so stop asking because you're wrong about that, atheists. How does Ham know? Genesis 1:1. End of. All the evidence you need. Then he flips to the evolutionist worldview after a nod to his debate with Bill Nye and Nye's honest statement that we don't know where matter came from. Well, Ham does because Genesis 1:1. And here we can flip to sinful evolutionist secularist atheists who are all inconsistent about their beliefs, seeing only what they want because sin, they're blinded by their sin. And I think this last part is a clever way to avoid his own inconsistencies. AIG needs to know where the universe and matter and energy came from. But God doesn't have to come from anywhere, and we don't have to explain him. So Ham can say, we just know Genesis 1:1. And again, this idea that it's so hard to believe in God, but Christians do it, so they are extra special. So there you go. And if it's not obvious yet, this video is not for atheists. It's not really to clarify anything for us. Like a lot of content that talks about atheists, this is for other Christians to reassure them that they are right and that they shouldn't listen to the sinful secularists who are really atheists and evolutionists. They should listen to Ken Ham and read Genesis 1:1. So what are your thoughts on this? Put it in the comments below. And while you're down there, you can like and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuffing for the blessed Algorithmo and his consort Algorithma. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a copy. That link is also in the description below, and I will see you next time for something else. Bye for now.